Hello everybody. So today I'm going to be doing a voiceover on this because I honestly forgot to turn on my microphone. I'm making this uh, jewelry box today, and I'm using a shelf liner by the Pioneer Woman. I actually found it on clearance at Walmart. So yeah, so for this I'm using doubled up medium weight chipboard just so that way it'll be a little bit sturdier, has a little bit more heft to it. Um, and I've already got some tape on the back of my chipboard, and the pieces that I'm using are 5.5 by 5.5. I'm using two of those, and that's for the top and the bottom. And for the sides, I'm using 3.5. I'm sorry, 3 by 5.25, two of those, and one that is 5 by 3 for the front. So now I am just lining everything up to make sure that I have just enough, and I'll save that scrap for later, and trimming off some more of the excess and save that for later too. And I had some trouble peeling off the back, so I cut that out because you don't want to watch me sit there and struggle to peel off the backing. So I now have the backing peeled off, which it is sticky, but it's not sticky enough to hold anything permanently. So I have double-sided tape already on, and I'm now peeling off the back of the double-sided tape, and I'm positioning it where I would like it on my shelf liner. So when I put down this next piece, I'm going to be putting it down. I'm going to give myself a little bit more leeway because this is doubled up chipboard that I glued together, and you want to give yourself a little bit of extra room when you're working with doubled up chipboard, so that way you have plenty of space for it to fold and bend. You don't want it too close, because otherwise uh, it won't fold properly, and you'll end up tearing something, and it's just, yeah, it's no fun. So I'm going to go ahead and put some 1-inch tape around the perimeter of my chipboard pieces, and this is so that way I can cover up or fold in my sides. And I'm using my little tiny ruler so that way I can get my clean edges, because I can't stand jagged edges. That's just me. So I've placed my 1-inch tape, and I'm going to lift up the backing now. Actually, I'm going to trim off some of the excess first because I had a little too much. You don't want to have too much of this stuff because it is kind of plasticky. It's not really paper. It's more of a kind of a vinyl plastic feel to it. So I'm going to go around and miter cut my corners before I lift up my um, the backing off of my double-sided tape. So when you are miter cutting your corners, you can use a spacer, which is the same width as the chipboard that you're using, so that way you don't get too close to your chipboard, because if you get too close to your chipboard, you're going to be able to see it when you fold it over, and you don't want to do that, especially if you're making something like this to sell. You don't want to have pieces of your chipboard showing. So personally, for me, I don't ever go straight across on my miter cuts, though. I always do it like this, kind of like a curve, so that way I have a little bit of extra material when I fold them over. And if there's a little too much, then I will just glue it down, or I'll trim where I need to trim. So, and you don't want to get too far away from your chipboard, because then you'll have little points sticking out, and that doesn't look good either, but you can always trim those off. So I'd rather have that than having uh, you know, pieces of my chipboard showing. So here I'm just trimming off a little bit more, and I think that's good. So now I'm going to make sure that my double-sided tape is nice and stuck and start peeling off the backing. And sometimes this double-sided tape gives me a little bit of trouble, so if you don't have fingernails, you're going to have a little bit of trouble, so you can use like your cutting tool, or if you have a pokey tool, you can use that to pick up the backing off your tape. So once you get the backing off your tape, you can go ahead and fold your sides in. Start with whatever side that you'd like. Like I said in a previous video, I always like to do the two sides across from each other and then do the other two, just so that way everything it just looks a little bit neater, in my opinion, that way. So get everything nice and tight. You don't want to pull it too tight because, like I said, this material is a little on the plasticky side and it will stretch. So if you pull it too hard, you're going to kind of have stretched out areas. So here I'm just kind of squaring everything off. Again, you don't want to go too rough with your bone folder, squaring off your sides, because if you do it too hard, again, it's going to stretch out this shelf liner, and it's going to make kind of like a ripple effect, and it just won't look good. So now I'm placing down a good amount of my 2-inch tape to hold down the inside liner. And go ahead and cut off a little bit of extra that I had there. And I'm going to struggle here for a minute to get that off my finger. And now that I've got that down, I'm going to cut off just enough to cover the inside, and I'll measure it out. Yours might be different because if you're using different measurements or what have you, but you want to measure to where you're going to have maybe about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch gap between where the liner is and your edge. So this is the difficult part because this material is obviously bigger than my trimmer, and I have to use my ruler to get a nice straight cut, and that's kind of difficult for me because I can't cut a straight line even with my ruler to save my life. Okay, so I have a piece trimmed out. It is about 13.5 inches by 5 1/4, and I'm just lifting up the backing off my tape now and making sure everything folds nicely. And where my lid is going to be, I'm going to put an extra piece of tape just because that's the part that's going to be used the most. It's going to be opened and closed and opened and closed. So I want to give it a little bit of extra strength just to put up with that much opening and closing. And if you're using paper for this, you especially want to do that. And I forgot to mention in the beginning, if you don't have this kind of shelf liner stuff, you can use craft paper or scrapbook paper for this. It will work fine. You just might have to join two pieces together to get the appropriate length. So now I'm just using my reptile glue for around the edges because, like I said, this stuff is adhesive, backed, but it's not permanent. It's not going to stick permanently. It's meant to be peeled off and thrown away. So now that I've got my glue on, I'm just going to line it up as nicely as I can, get it as straight as I can, which is always a challenge, but looks like I did okay. And I'm just getting up any kind of seepage that there might be. And I have a little bit of my tape sticking out of the side, but that's okay. I'm just going to use my fingernail to kind of scrape it off. I will use my bone folder to just kind of push it up under the piece that I put down, and whatever's left I can just use my finger blade to just cut it off. Thankfully the tape kind of peels off of this plasticky material, It takes a little bit of effort, but it'll come off and it'll be clean. Okay, so now that I've got everything nice and spread out, and I have everything glued down and taped down, I'm going to go ahead and just grab a little scrap piece, just so that way I can mark which side is my lid, and I'll put that to the side. Now I'm going to work on the actual box part. What we just did was the top, back, and bottom, and so now I'm going to go ahead and cut off a piece that will be tall enough to cover my box pieces. So I'm doing this way. It'll make sense in a minute. So I'm going to cut off a piece that is long enough and tall enough. So this method of box making I actually learned from the Posh Paper Lady. I don't know if this is specifically her creation. Like, I don't know if she came up with this method, but that's where I saw it. So I just, I like to give credit where credit is due. And yeah, that's where I learned how to do it this way. So real quick, we're going to do a test fit to make sure everything will fit properly, and it looks like it does, because you don't want to go and cover everything and make it look all nice just so that way you put it in and it doesn't fit. So go ahead and do a test fit. It's kind of awkward to do it because you got to kind of hold pieces in place, but just make sure everything fits. So if it doesn't, you can just trim off a little bit at a time and until it fits properly, but my pieces thankfully fit proper and everything looked nice and square. So now I am going to peel the backing off of my shelf liner. And the shelf liner has a tendency to roll up, but once you peel the paper backing, it will lay pretty flat. So don't worry about that too much. And I'm going to go ahead and peel the backing off my tape and get these ready to be stuck down. Now, I always label everything so that way I'm not wondering which piece is which and having to remeasure. So I usually always write the measurements and where I'm going to put stuff, like what piece is what, just to keep things kind of organized. So I cut off a piece of the shelf liner that has a clean edge on it, so that way I don't have to worry about making a straight cut at the bottom, and I'm just lining everything up at the bottom, giving myself a little bit more of a gap than I normally do because, again, this is doubled up medium weight chipboard. You don't want to put, again, you don't want to put them too close because if you try to fold them, they're just not. It's not going to work. Okay, so now I've got everything laid down, and I'm going to cut off any excess, but then once I get to the tip, the corner, I'm going to flare out. And again, this will all make sense here in a minute. And same thing on the other side. I'm going to cut off the excess, get to the corner, and flare out. So now we're going to take this, and I'm going to lay down my 2-inch tape. Get it torn off nice and clean. And I'm going to lay down another 1-inch piece of tape. Get everything smoothed down. And get it peeled up. Excuse me. So now, once you got your tape backing lifted, fold it over, and there you go. So now you can take your X-Acto knife or your whatever you're using to cut and trim off any excess, and you will have everything nice and covered. Now, I did that flare out so that way I would make sure to get the entire back covered And again, struggling to get that off my fingers. And I wouldn't have to worry about getting it perfectly folded over. So if you were to cut straight down, if you just so happen to get one of those pieces crooked, it would have not lined up and you'd have a bare piece of chipboard showing, if that makes any sense. So now I'm going to cover the raw edge in reptile glue, and this reptile glue will stick to this plastic shelf liner material. It doesn't, believe me, it doesn't feel like it will, but it will. So you're going to have to like hold it for a few seconds until it kind of gets tacky and sets up a little bit, but it will hold. And I think what I was saying there is that it turned those glue bottles that I ordered off of Amazon from, I think it's the brand is Chubby Gorilla. They're actually really, really good. They're really good for glue, and I wrote an Amazon review, and they're actually really good. I'm really glad that I bought them. So now I'm just getting everything lined up, and I'm putting a little bit more glue on the back, and I'm starting from the bottom, going up, and just kind of smearing it around so it doesn't run down. And I'll bring up my back. So you got to kind of hold it for a minute till it kind of gets set up and gets tacky. And what you can do, and what I did later on, is you can close your lid, get everything positioned, close your lid, and use some Scotch tape to hold everything in place, and then let it dry. You want to get it good and dry. I would say just let it sit for maybe 15-20 minutes, and let it get good and set up. And now I'm just testing my lid, getting it nice and worked in a little bit, making sure that my crystal knob looked good on it. And I'm just soaking up any excess glue that might have seeped out. Alright, so now that it is set up a little bit, as you can see, I added my Scotch tape to the sides and to the lid, just to get everything, or just to make sure everything stays together while I'm handling it. I went ahead and picked out the things that I'm going to use to decorate. I'm going to put on my crystal knob, quote-unquote crystal, it's just glass. I'm going to put my little silver feet and these little corner things that I used in the last video, and some Prima paper flowers. Some of them are Prima and some of them are Recollections from Michaels, but they are very pretty. Now for the feet and for all the metal that I'm going to put on here, I'm going to be using E6000, just because reptile glue, while it will stick to this shelf liner, I don't want to put anything with weight with it, just because this isn't paper and it might not hold as well with something heavy like that. So I would rather use E6000. And my lid was being a little stubborn, so I had to use my pliers to get that open. And I'm going to put a good dollop on the legs and get them stuck where I want them. Get them positioned. Now E6000 does take a little bit of time to get set up. I would say a good 20 or 30 minutes to where you can handle it. And then it does take a full 24 hours at least for it to cure and harden to where it's permanent. Even after 20 or 30 minutes, you can handle it, but you can still position things, and things can still fall off if you're too rough. So get my lid back on, get my feet positioned where I want them, make sure they're nice and even, and then the corners. And I'm sure this is very entertaining to watch. Alright, so the feet should be good enough now to where I can stand it up. And this is a point also where you can stand it up, and if if you feel a little wobble or anything like that, you can kind of gently tap on the sides, on the corners, to where it'll kind of even things out. But I didn't feel any wobble, so I didn't feel the need to do that. Again, my lid was being very stubborn, and I had to use my pliers to get the lid off the cap. Alright, so now I'm going to put my crystal knob, faux crystal knob, again using E6000, and I just put a small dollop in the middle because I didn't want to put so much that it's going to ooze out the sides, because once this stuff is stuck down, like once it oozes out the side, it will leave a residue behind, and it's not going to look good. So same thing for these. I'm just putting a little bit of dollop in the center and getting them positioned in the corners. And last one. And get that cap back on, because I'm sure you all know that E6000 will ooze out everywhere if you don't put the cap back on. Okay, so now here I'm going to use my hot glue for the flowers, and just because it's easier, you can use whatever glue you'd like, but to me, hot glue is easier for this because it dries so fast. And I'm going to have flowers on the top and on the front, and it's just easier so that way I can put them on all at once. And I am just gluing each one on, and I'm going to glue them on the front. And the only thing I don't like about hot glue is the little hot glue webs that get left over. I don't know if any of y'all have any hints on how to not have that happen. I don't know if it's just I'm using a cheap kind of hot glue or what. Not really sure, but anyway. If any of y'all have any suggestions, leave them in the comments, and it will be greatly appreciated. So I'm just pulling off the little hot glue cobwebs. As you can see, my E6000 hadn't set up on my knob completely, and it kind of fell back, but it's fine. But that is it. That is a finished jewelry box, and if you like what you saw, go ahead and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the like button, and I will be back with another one. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.